Good evening, welcome to UPARS Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the director of UPARS LA. This is March 2019. We have an extra special speaker here with us, all the way from Olympia, Washington. And her name is Elana Freeland. Over the years, Elana Freeland has been a Waldorf school pioneer, teacher, lecturer, storyteller, and writer. She has written for alternative publications, edited the stories of survivors of MK Ultra and ritual abuse, and has ghost-written books on diverse topics. Her second major in college was biology. In 1996, she was awarded a Master's of Arts in Great Books and Honors for her thesis on historiography at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Freeland has self-published a fictional American history series called Sub Rosa America about the deep politics behind the downfall of the United States since John F. Kennedy's assassination. In October of 2014, the Australian magazine Nexus published her article on invasive electromagnetic weapons, and now she has completed the sequel to Chemtrails, HAARP, and the full spectrum dominance of planet Earth, about the next operation to be served by global chemtrail ionospheric heater technology, the Space Fence, a world smart grid enabled by ionized atmosphere we now breathe. Inside the electromagnetic lockdown of the Space Fence, humanity is to be neurologically herded toward a transhumanist future. That certainly doesn't sound fun. But if you would, please give a warm UPARS welcome to Elana Freeland.
Oh, hello everyone. I love coming to California. In my town, everyone's asleep. Nobody wants to hear from me. Have to leave town to find my people. So I was amazed that I was invited by MUFON organizations. I actually hadn't thought of myself as a UFO person, but I do know a lot about the atmosphere now. And there are elements that have to do with some inexplicables that may be a little different from what you're accustomed to, but all the same must be taken into account, because now that the space age has begun in earnest, we will be seeing signs and wonders throughout the atmosphere, particularly now that they have found a way to keep it ionized. The problem with that ionization of the atmosphere is that we have to breathe it. And all of the nanoparticles in that mix that is being injected into the atmosphere to keep it Wi-Fi, wireless ready, 24/7 for military, industrial, intelligence operations. Those nanoparticles are probably the most serious part of the story that we have to deal with. I don't know, I used to think that we were just collateral damage for what needed to be put into the atmosphere to make it ready for the operations I will show you in a few minutes. But I now don't think that anymore. I think that we are being experimented on as we are being prepared for a transhumanist future. Thus, I am writing the third and I hope last book, which will be on synthetic biology and transhumanism. I'm already deep into it, and I should be done within the year. So that's, as far as my background, I mean, you know, you can go on the internet and find all manner of things about me. In fact, I've been getting loose as a goose lately on radio shows. I have noticed that. It seems like I'm just willing to confront listeners and just kind of blow things off. And I don't know what's happened to my attitude toward being on all these radio shows. But I do hope that I still say some valuable things and people will forgive my impertinence. But you know, after you've done so many radio shows, I've probably done 200 minimum. You get a little tired of it. So I apologize if I've offended anyone in here, but I might do it again tonight, who knows? Okay, so you've heard the bad news about the technical problems. That sort of goes with with giving talks. I should be used to it by now. There's always technical problems. And then on the radio shows, there's always technical problems too. I never owned a television, right? And I've never owned a cell phone. I am not a Luddite, but I am cautious. I'm 71 years old now. Nothing is hurting. The macrobiotic diet I've followed for 50 years seems to be pretty good. And I would like to keep going for a few more years. So thus I'm really limiting my wireless because our bodies are just not, we just can't do it. We can't do it. So come to a new relationship with your cell phone. If I forget to say that later, think about the possibility of that you may be pulsed by frequencies. We don't even need the 5G for that. They've already begun that. It will be coming from cell towers. It will be coming from the Internet of Things around you. It will be going straight through your cell phone and your 60 hertz in the wall. And you may find yourself having feelings or thoughts that really are very unlike you, and they may not be yours. So let's catch up on the technology now that a lot is, the speed at which this is being unfolded is amazing, isn't it? And I can understand thinking that it must be alien technology. I don't know about that, but I have been following a trail of how the technology is growing, and I hope to show that to you tonight. I will be speaking on Saturday night as well at LA Skywatch, and I have 2 PowerPoint presentations. I was not sure how much people here know about how the technology works, so I decided to be conservative and to put together a PowerPoint presentation that would get you up to speed to a certain point. And that point will be the nanotechnology and the smart dust, dusty plasma, et cetera, that I will be covering in another PowerPoint on Saturday night. So you're welcome to come to that because I simply had to make a call. I would hate to go through in a sort of, because I've been to LA Skywatch about 6 times, so I've kind of brought them along with me. And they are probably prepared for the other PowerPoint. So I hope that this will not be boring to some of you who may be very up to speed. I don't know, but that's the way it is when you meet an audience. Okay, so I skipped the previous this solar system one, but let's play a little bit of it. I played this in Santa Cruz. Some of you are here from the Santa Cruz wonderful, or was it Topanga Canyon? Yes, Topanga Canyon. Let's just listen. you may recognize is a Vimana. And I wrote a friend of mine this morning to find out from her just how old the story of the Vimanas are, plus the technology that was once here long ago, that the Rig Veda documents. The Rig Veda is thought to be 10,000 years old. And yes, scholars have found evidence of aerial ships in the Rig Veda. The Mahabharata, which contains the Bhagavad Gita, is full of advanced technologies, aerial ships, space stations, and weaponry. I just read this book this winter, wonderful book. You've probably read it already, The Ringmakers of Saturn. And I wanted to tell the credentials of the man who wrote this book. His name is Dr. Norman Berggren. And he is an alumnus of Ames Research Lab, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics predecessor of Ames Research Center, NASA, where he worked 12 years as a research scientist. At Ames, he pioneered the setting of design criteria for airplane thermal ice prevention and the developing of soil stability laws for airplanes, missiles, and rockets. He joined Lockheed Missiles and Space Company, now Lockheed Martin, where he was manager of the planning and analysis of flight tests for the Navy Polaris underwater launch missile system. During his 13 years at Lockheed, he also served as a senior scientist, having responsible analysis cognizance of special space satellite applications. He was an associate fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He's active as a leader in Congressional Visits Day on Capitol Hill, that was old time, credited with numerous awards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, how many people have read this book? Could you give me a show of hands? Very few. All right. All right, so you can still buy this book. It seems to me it's a bit expensive now, but you can also get it through the interlibrary loan, which is how I did it. And what he's looking at are the Voyager photos of Saturn in great detail, and seeing vast, huge ships making plasma cloud cover in the ring around Saturn. Now, this is very interesting to me because we have a ring forming around our planet as well. That's why I put that image on the front of the latest book, Under An Ionized Sky. And I'm now wondering about Saturn. I also saw an article recently, you probably saw it, recently meaning last week, about how they have now found that there are rings around Venus and, do you remember the other planet? I think it's Jupiter, yeah. Similar rings. So what are these rings? Certainly the one around our planet I kind of have some ideas on, but what about these other planets? What are these rings doing, and how are they being made? Ours, I have an idea of how it's being made. Before I go on with that, I want to put in something very important. This will be the last thing I say about this. I took this from Mein Kampf. In the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. Now, I'm not saying that about the rings around Saturn. I'm saying that about the carbons propaganda, the climate change propaganda, and the global warming propaganda. Now, I'm not saying that there is not some truth in the climate change and global warming. There is. What is entirely missing every single time there is a conference discussing these matters one more time, like the one we just had last week, Not once is the military ever mentioned. And it is crucially important to any dialogue on what is happening to make a ring around our planet, to completely control our weather, to run operations, including plasma, chemical, electromagnetic operations in our atmosphere, dumping masses, trillions and trillions of sensors and nanobots in the upper atmosphere to fall down for us to breathe. This all must be included in understanding what this global warming and climate change is. Oh, someone's sneaking up on the stage. This good? Okay. So I thought immediately of Goebbels, and it turns out that it wasn't Goebbels who said it. It was actually in Mein Kampf, about telling the big lie, and why the big lie seems to always work, and it has worked. Let's keep that in mind as we go through what I hope is closer to the truth tonight. So let's start with something we all know what this is, I hope, is HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project in Gakona, Alaska. In a way, this whole drama that I'm involved in now began with HAARP. In 1996, I was reading Nick Begich and Gene Manning's book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP. And I think some of you have heard me tell the tale that I was substitute teaching one day, reading the book during my lunch hour, and 2 male faculty joined me, and there was another mousy woman who stared at her sandwich the whole time we were talking, and they wanted to know all about what I was reading, and I told them the little bit I knew at that point. That was 1996. And the following day, I had a military helicopter over my house for 5 minutes as I was put on yet another list that I'm sure I was already on a few by then. So HAARP was crucial because they did a variety of experiments. We had other ionospheric heaters. We had Arecibo, we had Brookhaven National Labs, we had the one in ISCAT in Norway, CIRA in Russia. We had a lot, but none had the power that HAARP could have. It could actually sort of logarithmically increase the power depending on how it was used. It also had a steering mechanism in it. So HAARP really changed things. And it was for the Star Wars program, the SDI program, Strategic Defense Initiative under Reagan, Cheney, and Bush back in the 80s, when they had to table it because they could not run the operations the way they wanted to, because the atmosphere did not have enough particulate matter in it, and therefore they could not do wireless activities in it, and they needed that. HAARP changed all that. HAARP proved how to do it, how you could turn the Earth's atmosphere into a mini ionosphere. So HAARP is very important, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it so that you would know about it. Let's see if there's anything else. The other thing that I want to say about it, very important, is it is a phased array antenna. And what that means is it has a dual ability to steer. It had 180 antenna units organized in 15 columns by 12 rows. And what you might be interested in knowing is that 5G, that we're all in fear and trembling of, is also a phased array antenna with great steering capability. And this is very important. And I think Arthur Furstenberg one of the activists pursuing 5G, makes this public as often as he can. So that's HAARP. Let's see what this is. I don't think we need the sound for this. So you see how HAARP it is a weapon. It is a weapon system. And it is capable of creating earthquakes. And that's what the sky would look like if an earthquake or a weather program were being brought by the geoengineers. As for how an earthquake happens, if it were to happen naturally without scalar weapons, it would look something like this.
The U.S. government is firm in its position that HAARP is just an atmospheric research facility. But is it more than coincidence that since going online, some experts have reported strange weather anomalies, including massive floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes? HAARP went online in 1994, and construction continued until 2007. There are reportedly a total of 5 known ionospheric heaters, including HAARP, in the world today. There are possibly 20 other ionospheric heaters in existence all over the world. There is no conclusive proof that any of them are being used as weather weapons, though they do have the ability to manipulate the ionosphere. And that brings us to something else. December 2001. Scientists at NASA's Ames Research Center in Palo Alto, California make a discovery. In studying more than 100 earthquakes with magnitudes of 5.0 or greater, they find that almost all of them are preceded by electrical disturbances in the ionosphere. Could there be a connection to HAARP or a facility like it?
To say that HAARP can artificially excite the ionosphere in such a way to cause an earthquake, well, it alarms me.
Dr. Agnew experienced the power of ELF waves firsthand back in the 1980s. He was hired by an energy company to locate oil and gas using the same kind of ELF waves at much lower frequencies to carry out his search. It's a process called earth tomography. But during one particular incident, Dr. Agnew believes his use of HAARP-like ELF waves accidentally triggered an earthquake.
It was in the spring of 1987, we arrived in Roseburg, Oregon, to use our ELF technology to search for oil and gas. Setting up that day, we had a little bit different results than we expected, because the instant that we energized it, there was between a 4 and 4.5 on the Richter scale earthquake that occurred. We were so amazed about what seemed to be cause and effect. We get to an area that has a high propensity for earthquakes, in an area known as the megathrust of the Pacific Northwest. We turn it on, and an earthquake occurs.
Dr. Agnew demonstrates how he may have triggered the quake.
This is a scale model of what the area looked like in Oregon when we scanned for oil and gas in 1987. This strata right here represents the megathrust area underneath the ground. The rock represents the potential energy set up in the ground from a tectonic stress. What we're going to do is introduce ELF waves and demonstrate that it can in fact trigger an earthquake.
In this case, Dr. Agnew is using a stereo speaker to produce the ELF waves needed for his demonstration.
ELF waves, extremely low frequency waves, are just like a subwoofer. In your car, you can actually feel the vibrations through your body. ELF waves are the same way. They vibrate the earth, and at right resonant frequencies, they can have devastating effects.
When the speaker is activated, ELF waves begin to emit. Tiny vibrations in the sand are detected. Then a few seconds later, the rock representing the fault line shifts.
As you can see, in a very few seconds, the resonant frequency built up in our model released the potential energy in the rock, that concussion on a real scale would have been felt for 100 miles.
All right, so that's important because HAARP operates with the ELFs. We're not talking a lot of power here. We're not talking big wattage. This is, it's the power of the resonance created by the extra low frequency waves. And we get lost sometimes in thinking of the power, but it's really the resonance and the pulsing that goes on. So here is, this is sort of the beginning of the scalar element of HAARP. And for the scalar element, I highly recommend reading an essay by Tom Bearden. I was recommended it, and I'm now reading it for the third time. It's called Background for Pursuing Scalar Electromagnetics. He gave this, this essay is from February 1992. It's very, very good. And here I have a picture of action at a distance scalar technology that can be done by ionospheric heaters. Now, I'm bringing this up because this is how I think the 9/11 towers were brought down. I think that it was at least 2, if not 3, scalar beams over the target area of New York City. And do I think that it would have been the same in Paradise, California? No. No, I don't. I think that was using technology in a different manner to pick and choose what would burn and what would not burn. But it certainly was using the directed energy weapon. I mean, that's what I'm finding is when I wrote that article in Nexus about directed energy weapons, at that time I thought they were discrete things that could do things to people. It did not occur to me when I wrote that article in 2014 that you could actually use the environment itself and pull energy from either the Internet of Things or from dropping a lot of chemtrails over a place 3 days in advance so that there were lots of nanoparticulates of aluminum oxide in the soil, and that you could actually use a laser to ignite it and then simply control the nanotechnology on the ground to move in swarms in the directions you wanted them to go. And this is exactly how Paradise, California was done. And the one I owe that knowledge to is Jamie Lee at aplaintruth.info. Jamie and I are often in telephone conversations that run a little long. And he interviewed in Paradise Lost number 51, he interviewed an anonymous scientist that I highly recommend you listen to. Jamie talks too much during that, but subsequently he apologized for that, so I won't get on him too heavy about that. But the scientist made it clear that the swarming nature of the nanoparticles, yes, this can now be a directed energy weapon. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Turning our entire environment into a weapon used in a variety of circumstances. What happened in New York in 2001 was unspeakable, but it probably was on par with this, this graphic that I'm showing you now. But it was definitely a scalar operation. Some more things going on. This makes you feel strange. but this would be how I look at it anyway. Maybe I'm wrong. This would be one of the laptop boys creating plasma in the clouds. Most of the clouds we see now are generally not moisture clouds. They're generally plasma clouds. They're dry, and they've been created with particulates, very little water, and radio frequency or microwaves. Now, in 2013, you may remember HAARP closed down. It had been running since the late 90s. They always say it was later, but we know it wasn't. It was in the late 90s, right around the time Nick and Jean wrote their book. And then they closed it down briefly, and then they said that they had passed it on to the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, and they probably did on paper. But as we know, our universities have changed too. They're all dominated by the military intelligence industrial complex. That's the only place they can get money for their labs. The military is the biggest is the one paying for experiments. And, you know, it whistles the tune it wants you to dance to. So whether Fairbanks owns HAARP or not, it is still running, because the power of that machine is too great to give up.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you this morning. Very interesting. I wanted to ask a couple questions here about HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Several of you at the table have a little bit of a piece here. As you know, this is located up in Alaska. It's currently funded by the Air Force Research Lab. It was formerly funded by the Office of Naval Research. One of the prime customers is DARPA, which is currently running experiments at the facilities here. So questions to several of you this morning. I'm told by the president of the University of Alaska that the Air Force has pulled its support for the facility, and they're taking steps to demolish it or take it down this summer. He's making the argument that there is other opportunities for us, and is trying to find a path where the university might be able to take title to the facility. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Prabhakar. I understand that a lot of folks here on the committee probably don't understand what HAARP does. I think most Alaskans don't really know what HAARP does or why the agency is involved in it. So a very brief explanation, and then a more direct question. Would you be disappointed, or would you lose something if HAARP were to go away?
Senator Murkowski, as I think you know, one of our programs has been using the HAARP facility for the research that it's pursuing. And my understanding is that we did get value out of that interaction. The P in DARPA is projects, and we're not in the business of doing the same thing forever. So very naturally, as we conclude that work, we're going to move on to other topics. So it's not an ongoing need for DARPA, despite the fact that we had actually gotten some good value out of that infrastructure in the past.
Understood. Then to Dr. Walker and Mr. Schaefer, then, Dr. Walker, your agency is currently running the facility. I've mentioned that it's our understanding through the president of UAF that the plans are to move forward and demolish the facility this summer. So the question to you is that accurate? Can you explain why? And then perhaps to both you and Mr. Schaefer, is there any benefit in exploring a potential relationship with the University of Alaska to perhaps take over the HAARP?
Thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it. And but that work has been completed. The Air Force has maintained the site for other government agencies to use for several years now. And with DARPA completing their project, that's our last government customer that we have in the site. We have put out a call government-wide for other agencies that had interest in managing the site or taking it over, and including going out to academia and seeing if there was any interest there.
Well, that's all lies. So we don't need to listen to that. Of course, they got great value out of it, and of course, it's not going to go away. It's still of great value for creating drought conditions, for storm building. There's so many things as a weapon. HAARP is, I can't even imagine an ionospheric program without HAARP. And it isn't just HAARP up there. It actually works with two other sites, the one at Poker Flats and the one in there's another in Fairbanks through the university. It works with those two, so there are three of them. And where there are three, there is scalar, okay? So I always keep that in mind. All right, let's look at the list. Again, you've heard me ad nauseum bring this list up. I think it's fantastic. Clifford Carnicom created this list in 2005 in his movie Cloud Cover, also called Aerosol Crimes. I've tweaked it a bit, but not too heavily. I don't know if Clifford even agrees with it. I'm scared to ask him. I'm not going to. I like my list. Okay, so weather engineering and geoengineering, we know that one by heart. Is there any natural weather? Not to my knowledge. There is weather coming off the South Pacific, which is naturally initiated there, but it is quickly taken up by the geoengineers and moved in the directions that they want it to, now that they control the jet stream. Okay. So weather engineering, geoengineering, are they the same? No, not exactly. The weather engineering is simply the weather. And just to be clear about the weather, to control the weather, you can imagine what I'm going to say. It's tremendous power, tremendous worldly power over nations and coalitions. And it's a done deal. Now, what we watched for over a decade with the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the mayhem, like down in Haiti, the Hurricane Sandy, hurricane in New Orleans, all of these hurricanes, all the way up to the Fukushima tragedy, were certainly experimental. And you can read about that in the Chemtrails HAARP book. I go into all those weather disasters to look at why I think they were created. None of them were natural. They're politically very powerful. And you can blackmail nations with this technology. I think that's obvious. As far as the geoengineering goes, that has multiple prongs on it as a weapon. And I'm going to read them now. Chemical and electromagnetic operations, planetary geophysical operations, directed energy warfare operations, surveillance neural operations, biological transhumanism operations, detection, obscuration of exotic propulsion systems. And I'm going to go a little deeper into a few of them, and just because you can get an idea of what you're witnessing up in the sky. Many of these operations, you will see them or you will hear them. Many people have complained of these amazing sounds like groaning or trumpets or all sorts of things coming from the Earth. These are the planetary and geophysical operations. These are electromagnetically created sounds. And probably you could call it infrasound. As far as chemical and electromagnetic operations, creating extreme electrical weather events, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes to keep the atmosphere charged. That is one of the purposes beyond political blackmail of controlling the weather, is you can use that energy created by making a weather event to actually charge the atmosphere, recharge the atmosphere for all the other operations. There is a lot of plasma and antimatter farming going on in our atmosphere now. You can find articles on it, you can find papers on it, you can find patents on it. Plasma is the name of the game, and antimatter is also the name of the game. Another one that Jim Kerr was telling me about, who's an activist, is methane gas. Methane gas may be being used as fuel as well for some of these exotic propulsion craft that are now found here and there hiding in the cloud cover. And there we're at the 7th operation, the detection and obscuration of exotic propulsion technologies. And I'll show you some things of that. They're also doing, under chemical and electromagnetic operations, they're manipulating Birkeland currents. Birkeland currents are those magnetic lines of force that connect our Earth with our magnetosphere and with the sun. They're creating their own now. Alvin Whistler waves, same things. They're creating them. I mean, to have handed them an electrified atmosphere, chemically and nanoparticle created, has just been Christmas every day for these plasma physicists and astrophysicists. The question is what we're paying down here on the Earth for all that is being seeded in the upper atmosphere. This is the problem. And as usual, it's just going forward with no thought as to what the blowback will be. Another one would be planetary geophysical operations. Always in the background, I sense, just as Joseph P. Farrell in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations said in 2012, the Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev's 3 phases of technological achievement for any civilization aspiring to a space age. Yes, we are in the space age now, and I'll show you President Trump signing off on it. But it's also just phase 1 of the space age, and that phase 1, according to Kardashev, is full spectrum dominance of planetary control of planet Earth. That's the first thing, and that includes us. Full spectrum dominance means all of us, all of life on Earth, everything having to do with Earth life under full spectrum dominance. And now that they have the wireless keys to the kingdom and tons of nanoparticles cheap to make and all the rest that are on the nanoscale, they are achieving this. But of course, the lockdown that I talk about in the Space Fence book, the lockdown has to be electromagnetic, and it has to be right into our systems, right into every living thing's systems. The second phase, after you have full spectrum dominance of your planet, is you're going to need control over your star and its systems, and that has already begun. We keep hearing about the solar minimum, And, you know, the solar minimum is getting blamed for this, that, and the other. How handy to have it going on. And meanwhile, we have the solar simulators up there. I don't know how many, but I have heard 300 around the world as the experimentation continues with having artificial suns and the cloud cover that covers our sun, and to see what happens from that. So will they be able, as Tesla indicated, to control the sun and bring plasma energy from the sun for fueling some sort of technology? I would assume so. What the price will be, I do not know. So control over one's star. All right. And the third phase of Kardashev is control over one's galaxy and its systems. I mean, galaxy, this reminds me of a fairy tale I used to tell when I was a Waldorf teacher to 3-year-olds called The Fisherman and His Wife, where she wants him, he's met a flounder in the sea, and the flounder has said, fisherman, fisherman, make a wish and I'll grant it. And so his wife wants to be the mayor. Oh, so the flounder does it. And then the wife wants to be the king, and the flounder does it. And then the wife wants to be the pope. And finally, the wife wants to be God. And the flounder says, go home and see what your wife has. And he goes home and it's all a shambles. She's gone too far. And that's what this reminds me of. Imagine control over our galaxy. It's scary when I think of these sociopaths. All right, then to the next one. The utilization of droughts, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes for environmental modification and disaster capitalism. Here we have, again, California. You are the whipping boy of the geoengineers. You have been for a long time. You've been used as some sort of testing base for decades. I've watched other operations, but not for geoengineering. Disaster capitalism, yes, make money while you're destroying things, and then you'll get a lot of, the Wall Street will do well, and it'll make America great again, I suppose. Earth harvesting for real estate investment trusts, sun simulations, solar experiments, and Tesla's quote that he is famous for, man could tap the breast of Mother Sun and release her energy toward Earth as needed, magnetic as well as light. But of course, Nikolai had in mind responsible people who could do that. Then there's the directed energy warfare operations. The revolution in military affairs, I talk about that in the recent book, has irrevocably changed the nature of warfare. Asymmetric warfare, nonlinear physics, these are all the bywords of our era. Warfare is now about full spectrum dominance of both the electromagnetic spectrum and the cultural civilian spectrum. There is no line between combatant and non-combatant anymore, my friends. It is about control, absolute. Scalar interferometry of ionospheric heaters, lasers and masers, particle beam weapons. In case you know anyone who's being targeted, usually the maser is the weapon of choice to control their lives and their brains. Then there's cloaking. There's a lot of cloaking going on. Some people are seeing chemtrails being laid by something invisible. That's cloaking. There is something doing it, but you can't see it. Then surveillance and neural operations, I think we know what that is, but I don't think you know how deep it's going to go, because it's going to use the nanotechnology that we have ingested and breathed in. Then there's artificial intelligence, mind control, remote neural monitoring, electromagnetic targeting of populations and individuals. Remember what I said about your cell phone being pulsed? And then 5G access to DNA via the phased array antenna setup. Biological transhumanism operations, that would be a hive mind, is being created in us through that pulsing of us through the Internet of Things and our cell phones. How do you fight the hive mind? Well, the first step is if you're having thoughts or feelings that you don't think that are yours, you need to consciously realize that. Maybe make a note, put the date down, the time, the circumstances, keep track of it, see if there's patterns. Because if you're living in a population base, probably it's going to happen at some point, if it's not already. I can tell in my town because of how just sleepy and dreamy everyone is. There's no real awareness. Habits are sacrosanct, and people protect their habits because they want to stay asleep. So I don't know what to tell you about how you're going to see that hive mind, but I think that you need to understand that the first thing you do is not feel bad and go to a bar and drink or have some more marijuana or something, that you really pay attention. This is your era. This is my era. This is your watch. This is my watch. We need to really have clear thoughts about what is going on around us. You don't know what that will bring. If consciousness is something we've never tried as a frequency, as a way of defense of civil society, it's time we started really looking at that and what it would take to hold a similar frequency among all of us as we observe. As I used to say when I came back from living in England, people said, "Why do you even want to go?" I want to be on the Titanic when it goes down. I'm serious. I want to observe it. I want to take it into death and into my next life when I come back to really kick butt. And I invite all of you to join me. Because as I said, I told you I'm getting loose as a goose on a radio show the other day. I said, yeah, I'm meeting people from my future now. They're going to be with me next time. I don't know if that's true, but I certainly hope it is. All right, the hive mind, nanoparticle delivery. We're ingesting sensors, microprocessors, Morgellons, electro-optical technology that's reporting back to base at the fusion centers. Yes, the fusion centers are primary in this. I now have confirmation of that. That's why the fusion centers were created post 9/11. Remote genetic engineering of DNA, 5G, will be used for that. Maybe even 6G, I don't know. Replace nature with virtual reality. Already, a lot of kids are preferring virtual reality to reality because to them, reality looks boring. I mean, we're here for entertainment, aren't we? I mean, that's what TV's been telling us for the last 50 years, which is why I've never owned one. So these are the operations that geoengineering is doing but never talks about. It is not about carbons. That's the big lie. It is not about global warming. That's the big lie. Though these ionospheric heaters do warm the atmosphere. And so they needed a cover story for that, because it's happening. They can't keep it from us. Even though you can use this technology to make extreme cold and fake snow and fake ice, it's still warming. Okay, so that's that. I want to make sure I feel like I'm driving it into you, so you'll never forget. All right, next. Just for the newbies, if there are any newbies in here, I'm sure there's a couple. This is the difference between a chemtrail and a contrail, right? It's a very old film. So these trails, we don't get these anymore. We get a different chemical configuration. They don't form straight lines anymore, well, very much. Mostly they're curly or intermittent. There's the, see it? Up there at the top, that little teeny-weeny thing? Now that's a contrail. And notice how it's evaporating. Very quickly. The rest of the chemtrails are chemical trails, and by the way, you know that we got that term from the U.S. Air Force Academy. That was their term in 1990. We stole it from them, and then we got called conspiracy theorists. Go figure. Okay, then I won't play this whole thing, but it is so good, and this would be something you could show in your neighborhoods with neighbors or people still speaking to you, that is.
Aircraft making a condensation trail is very similar in many ways to when you go outside on a cold day and exhale, you create a condensation trail. That little cloud is a condensation trail. Now, if you take a 2-mile walk on a cold day and you can turn around and you can see your condensation trail tracking all the way back for 2 miles. That's how crazy it is to think that what we're looking in the sky is actually condensation trails.
The contrails, not the chemical, the contrails occur because of cold air, minus 30. It takes a high altitude, around 30,000 feet plus. There's carbon dioxide and water vapor in that exhaust. That turns to ice crystals, and that's what you see, the white stream behind it. Those white crystals of ice warm up, dissolve, and the smoke goes away. And it never lasts more than a minute. What we're seeing now, and I first could not believe it, and I started looking at the skies, and these are not normal. They're not natural. There's something going on. I don't know who it is or why they're doing it. All I can testify is it's not natural and it's not normal. It's got to be some outside influence doing that. Thank you.
I'm here to give you testimony that chemtrails, they're not contrails, are indeed real. They're spraying almost every day. I watch the clouds and watch the spraying program going on. I want to tell you that we're in very great danger from the pollution that's coming down over us. And we've been led astray by the military-industrial complex, and they're responsible for the cloud's creation and weather manipulation programs. They're dark operations. That's why they're not out in the media.
I look around and I see people are starting to look up and see this. Many times I've spoken about chemtrails, and I get this blank look on my face. What are you talking about? I'm saying, look up. As a pilot, before I fly, I look up. And so, boy, they're really out there working.
When you look up at the sun and you see a white haze, that is aluminum floating in the air right now, and it's coming from the aircraft.
There's a huge amount of aluminum being found because these sprays have aluminum, strontium, barium, manganese. And there's a lot of argument that aluminum is very common to be found. But aluminum is only common in a bonded form. It's not common in a free form, and we're finding high rates of free aluminum in the soil, which is not natural.
The metal compounds that are being used are environmentally dangerous. We need to be monitoring them. We need to be testing them.
Okay, these previous guys, I've watched exactly what they do, and yes, they are correct. I've seen exactly the same stuff, so ditto marks on those. You want some figures? Okay, latest water test, tested the rain. 13,100 micrograms per liter of aluminum in the rain in 2013. Normally, it should be 0. So 13,100 is pretty damn much, folks. It used to be 0, then it was 100s in the 2000s, and then since 2010, it's into the 1,000s and the latest 13,100. In the snow on Mount Shasta, pristine Mount Shasta, 61,000 micrograms per liter, 4 times the amount that is found in the soil up there. Where in the hell is this stuff coming from if it's not coming from the soil?
We have clouds in the sky we've never seen before. Almost every day I'm seeing clouds I've never seen before. And NASA has been even named a few of these new clouds. And it's really interesting, but NASA is a corporation. I want you to know that.
NASA has also conducted a research program in what they call metallized fuels. We're actually putting aluminum oxide right in the fuel because it has 2 atoms of aluminum and 3 atoms of oxygen. So during the combustion process, it releases all that oxygen and dramatically increases efficiency, but it leaves the aluminum in the air.
We got things coming from sky down, and it's a huge, huge problem. Because as it comes down, what happens is a couple of things. Is that it actually is in our air, we breathe it. And as we breathe it, it's actually going to go up to our nostrils, into our brain, easiest access to our brain frontal lobe. The contaminants that have been identified, which already been mentioned, are aluminum. Aluminum is the #1 free radical generator to the brain to cause early apoptosis, which is early death of brain, and it begins to set off the scar tissue, which we call the amygdalin, which is part of the chemical matrix related to Alzheimer's.
I'm a neurologist practicing in Reading for 17 years, and in the past 5 years, I have seen the number of patients with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases tremendously increased, almost quadruple.
I became interested in chemtrails about 8 years ago when I was in Hawaii, and the Hawaiians are really being very vocal about it. I concur about the increasing number of Alzheimer's. They have been able to take the aluminum and micronize it, which means it'll stay up longer. But it also means, and I don't know if any of you have noticed some metallic taste in your mouth when they're spraying, but you inhale that, it goes up through your cribriform plate and through your sinuses and into the brain.
As you heard, to spray nanoparticles, very small particles. These nanoparticles, they basically trigger a programmed cell death in the brain, and that is the ultimate path we see in Alzheimer's.
Okay, you get the picture. So, regarding the nanoparticles of aluminum and other metals that are coming down just from the JP8 fuel, just the JP8. I'm not even talking about supplementary systems on jets, which there are. We've found ducts off the wings. We've found ducts on the sides of the combustion chamber, emitting various things. And the scary part to me, after hearing an Italian pilot testify, is that often the chemical addition of the supplements is controlled from the ground, not by the pilot. It's controlled from the ground. So they have no say in it. This one, maybe I'll skip this one. This is the one in which a citizen calls NASA and talks to a NASA guy. I guess he kept his job after this, but it was quite dramatic. Well, I'll show a little bit of it. He brought up, as did Rev. Michelle Hopkins of years ago. She was one of the first chemtrail video whistleblowers. and always ended with a nice prayer at the end. She also said that they were distributing lithium over population bases. And as we know, lithium is used in manic depression and is a psychotropic. And of course, lithium is also expensive. So I can't believe that it wasn't due to something more than just that lithium is extremely conductive. I think it had to do with the population bases. It was rocket launches from Wallops back east over large population density areas. But here, he does admit that they are spreading lithium.
Эксперимент номер 437. Предполагаемая продолжительность. Никто не может скрыться.
I'd love to play you back the recording that when I called NASA yesterday and I spoke with someone in your Washington, D.C. office, I was told that he's scared to death. He's going to denounce his citizenship and go back to the Philippines.
Okay.
That's what I was told by NASA yesterday when I called.
Okay. And
Directly from your office.
Did you record that conversation with their knowledge?
Well, I'm sorry?
Did you record that conversation with their knowledge?
Are you recording my conversation with that knowledge, sir?
No.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm not recording any conversation.
You're not recording any conversation with my knowledge, and NASA isn't either, and you can't get through it anyway. If you want to leave a message, it rings and rings and then hangs up on you. Same with Wallop Island. So I would love to leave a message there. Could you give me a direct answer? Because it says you're the scientist here on the NASA website.
Yeah, I'm involved in the project, but...
You are a scientist, so then, and you know that this is experimental, you've never done it before?
No, it's been done in the 1970s, it's been done recently in the 1990s and 2000s.
Oh, that's not what it said on this article here.
3, 2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
It hasn't been done since 1970, the lithium release in the daytime.
Why would it be done now then, sir?
So, regarding lithium, I want to recommend an essay to read by Ann Fillmore, PhD. She wrote it in 2016. I helped her edit it. Aerosol experiments using lithium and psychoactive drugs over Oregon. And what was happening was Anne became, for a while, the person that people would call. She knew a lot of people along the coast, Oregon coast, when they got ill. And they would talk over the chemtrails and see if there's a correlation. And then Anne and two other activists at that time, 2016, or 2015 actually, were contacted by a whistleblower who was the weatherman, worked in the weather agency of the state of Oregon. And he said that lithium was definitely being distributed along the coast in various small towns, and that there were people who were following up on it for money. And so she wrote the paper, and it's very good, it's still good, in order to understand the challenges that lie before us as we try to find out what experiments are going on in our area. I told you that geomagnetically, we all live in different geomagnetic signature areas. And I think that's a very large factor. This one I'm going to skip. This one, just a little bit of the Lockheed Martin. Some of you who were at Topanga Canyon will remember this, but Lockheed Martin is, just as Raytheon owned all the patents and ran the HAARP program, and saying Raytheon is like saying the CIA. I mean, It's a synonym. I assume Lockheed Martin is similar because Lockheed Martin now owns all the patents that have to do with the space fence and runs the space fence. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon are the two most powerful military contractors in the world. You can look up the top 10 yourself and you'll see them right at the top. So they are not what they seem. They are not just for profit. They are deeply engaged in the changing of humanity, in my opinion. So let's see if we can just do a little bit. They're going to make it sound like the space fence is just a couple of things, and they're just counting trash up and revolving around the Earth to make the Earth safe. But as I point out in the book, there are so many parts. It's like an internet of things for the space fence. All the radar installations, everything is all being used to lock us down and plug us in.
Space is no longer a vast, empty void. Unprecedented quantities of new satellites, derelict satellites, and debris litter the skies, posing an imminent threat to America's space assets. Lockheed Martin's Space Fence system is a ground-based system of S-band radars designed to greatly enhance the Air Force space surveillance network. It provides unprecedented sensitivity, coverage, and tracking accuracy, and contributes to key mission threads with the ability to detect, track, and catalog small objects in low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and geosynchronous orbit. In a word, Space Fence will revolutionize space situational awareness. It offers assured surveillance coverage for improved custody, and features the capability to develop long arc tracks for accurate initial orbit determination and differential correction, while simultaneously maintaining a persistent surveillance volume. In today's ever-expanding space environment, Space Fence improves the accuracy and timeliness for association, propagation, and orbit improvement. It features an open architecture net-centric design. The closely coupled radar signal processing and mission processing suite improves accuracy, discrimination, and timeliness for detection of closely spaced objects, breakups, maneuvers, lost object location, launch, attitude change, and conjunction assessment. Space Fence not only tracks objects, but can precisely determine their projected orbit. This allows operators to reconstruct recent events, such as collisions or satellite breakups, and accurately predict future events. For high-interest objects, a microfence can be electronically constructed to gather more track data, focusing radar resources specifically on that object, providing more timely and accurate information. The Space Fence system includes up to 2 minimally manned radar sites, mission processing, and the system operations functionality. Each radar site features a design boasting closely spaced but separate transmit and receive arrays that are mission optimized for high availability and low lifetime support costs, including prime power. The dual aperture configuration offers efficiency and affordability. Each array is environmentally protected by a pressurized, electronically transparent radome. The arrays are continuously calibrated in the background, providing a higher degree of accuracy. Transmit and receive LRUs can be replaced while the radar is operating. The arrays, as well as the signal and mission processing suites, are fully scalable to fit any mission design.
Etc. So, to remind you of our condition, the electromagnetic spectrum is always so humbling to me as a human being, because I look at the teeny-weeny little bit of spectrum that my visual and perception has. Look at that. That's where that little rainbow wedge is. That little teeny weeny bit there, that's us. We can't see. We can't see this invisible realm that now we are developing the technology to control. We can't see any of it. Can we afford the machines, the technology? No, we can't afford that kind of technology. So how limited we are in our perception. This would have to do with, entities that have plasma bodies. Would we be able to see them? Maybe if we had infrared, we could, but we would need goggles or something, like night vision goggles. This is our condition. We need to keep that in mind as we discount this idea and that, or decide that this or that is not true. We simply cannot see, so we're going to have to use our thinking our way through this stuff. That's what I do. I wasn't born with this knowledge, believe me. I'm struggling. I mean, biology is a little bit easier for me, but physics, I have to really work at this and read things a few times. Let it sort of incubate for a few days. Go back to it. Figure out what I missed. Yeah.
Elana, who produced that film? So Lockheed Martin?
Oh, yeah.
To sell it?
Oh, to show how great it is that we have this wonderful trash counter, Because doesn't it make sense that they would have done this then? This was, I think, 2015. But now, how many satellites, how many CubeSats has Elon Musk put up? I don't know. Was it 30,000 or something? It was some huge astronomical, and the CubeSats are only about this big each. Well, they're all up there. Maybe. Are they up there? Well, if they are, somebody's going to need to count them. Going to need to keep track of them as they sandwich us in with the 5G. They wedge us between the phased array antennas on them and the phased array antennas on our phones, and then we're right in the middle. Does this sound like a good idea? I don't think so. So, yes, I do want to play this. This is from that great film I always recommend, Resonance, Beings of Frequency. This is us. I just showed you our frequency deal of that tiny little wedge we have going. But this is the other part of us.
An unknown scientist is about to make a discovery that should have changed everything. His name was Winifred Otto Schumann. On the day in question, he was teaching his students about the physics of electricity, how a sphere within a sphere can create electrical tension, and subsequently, a frequency. Schumann's class had struggled to understand the subject, so to make it easier, the professor instructed them to imagine the Earth as one sphere and the ionosphere as another. He then asked them to calculate the tension that would exist in between. Having no idea himself, Schumann also began to calculate. Eventually, he arrived at a frequency of approximately 10 Hertz. As incredible as it seemed to Schumann, our planet had a pulse, a measurable frequency that surrounded life on Earth. Although the professor was proud of his find, he didn't see it as a hugely significant one, especially as it was only published in a small science journal, confined to the back pages, under the heading of Schumann resonance. It would take several years, and an incredible twist of fate, before the professor would begin to realize the true importance of Schumann resonance. That twist of fate had begun 30 years earlier, with another German scientist by the name of Hans Berger. Using an EEG machine he had built himself, Berger had made the first ever recording of electrical frequency transmitted by the human brain. It was initially suggested the wave be named after the man who'd discovered it, but Berger, being a modest man, elected for an alphabetical name and called it the alpha wave. Shortly after Professor Schumann's discovery, one of Hans Berger's colleagues, a man named Dr. Ankermüller, happened to stumble upon a bedraggled copy of a small scientific journal. The exact same small scientific journal that Professor Schumann's discovery had been published in several years before. He read the piece several times, shaking his head in disbelief. He realized instantly the magnitude of what was in front of him. The frequency of the alpha waves, recorded by Hans Berger, were almost identical to Schumann resonance. The frequency of the Earth. Dr. Ankermüller immediately contacted Schumann to convince him to investigate further. Schumann agreed and worked alongside one of his students to refine his discovery. They studied in detail how tension is discharged by lightning in the Earth ionosphere cavity. Eventually, they came up with an exact frequency. The pulse of the Earth, Schumann resonance, was exactly 7.83 Hz. The discovery was remarkable. Schumann resonance wasn't just similar to the alpha waves of the human brain, it was identical. The brain's frequency, which controlled our creativity, our performance, our stress, anxiety, and our immune system, had somehow tuned in to the frequency of the planet. The pulse of the Earth had become the pulse of life.
So you can see why the Schumann resonance would be imperiled now with all of the frequencies that are moving through us every day in our wireless world. As we see all these young people walking along staring at their phones, there certainly is an interference going on between us and our frequency. So it has to affect our thoughts, has to affect our thought life. So we have, on the one hand, we have the very, very narrow perception range in the electromagnetic spectrum. And on the other, we are connected to all of life through our Schumann resonance. And yes, the Schumann resonance naturally varies from time to time. We live in what's called the Schumann well, and certainly now that our radio frequency and microwave levels are millions of times what they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago even, we still have that resonance connected. And that was, did you say that was resonance that brought that down? Yeah, it was resonance. It was like, oh, thank you, but I have to go on with my video. Yeah, right. So I really recommend this fantastic film. It's very important. We are resonant beings. And so you still, as dire as all of this information is, you still have choices, such as your own resonance frequency within your own home, within the space in which you live. You really must examine what you are allowing to run without it needing to run. I'm getting better and better at being able to see into the invisible, going beyond my electromagnetic spectrum deficit, but it's through my consciousness that I'm doing it. It isn't through some fantastic enhancement that I've somehow found through a supplement on the web. No, it's me paying attention to what is running and making sure everything's shut down at night, and putting my head to the north, magnetic north, and doing as much as I can, turning electric lights off in every single room, turning appliances off if I'm not using them. All of this, the 60s sort of implanted me with, because we were very environmental then. But I know it's important to do, to be conscious of what electrics are still running around you, because you're always surrounded by the 60 hertz until you step outside. Okay, then. Oh, yes, here he is, signing the National Space Council with Buzz Aldrin. And remember, his uncle, John Trump, was the National Defense Research Committee technical aide directed to cover up the theft of Nikola Tesla's papers upon his death. I thought I'd just say it like it really is. That's really the story. And I'm not impugning President Trump. I'm simply saying that the fact that this was his uncle certainly, absolutely, certainly had something to do with the choice of him running on the Republican ticket. No question in my mind. And then here he's signing a policy directive on traffic management in space. That would be Lockheed Martin, which I hope he hasn't chosen Lockheed Martin to brief him on what's going on. It's like, you know, asking the fox to tell you about the chicken house. Space Force, right? We have a Space Force now. NASA probe, and then this is what we have around the planet. You've seen this before, some of you, because I'm very fond of it. It's the only place I've ever found that actually shows the space fence in near Earth orbit. Where are you? Why am I so bad at this? There it is. Huh? There we go.
Scientists have discovered a human-made barrier around Earth, protecting against the natural particle radiation in space. They believe the bubble was formed by very low-frequency waves, or VLFs. VLFs have been found to interact with the particles in space, affecting how and where they move. VLFs are used for radio communications, including with submarines, because they can penetrate deep into the ocean. The waves can also travel far into the environment around Earth. By understanding more about how VLF transmissions help shape our space environment, we learn more about this complex region surrounding us. The more we know, the more situational awareness we have to protect our satellites from natural radiation in space.
That's the second time you heard that term, situational awareness. SSA, Space Situational Awareness. It's very, very important to them because that justifies the release of trillions of sensors. So they are communicating with these nanosensors far above the planet that unfortunately fall down and end up in our lungs and in our brains. And I assume they too are communicating with somebody somewhere at one of these fusion centers or whatever. So here they talk about this ULF barrier, they call it. Well, it's a ring. It's a Saturn-like ring that's forming, and it is formed partially by the rockets. We are sending, every week we're sending, I don't know how many rockets into space for a parabolic visit. Back down. This is not moonshots. This is just sensors on the rockets sensing and doing lots of measurements and all sorts of things up there, while out the back of the rocket is coming, spewing all of these heavy metals that get up into the stratosphere and then maybe even a little further, and then end up either in centrifugal force going around and around and around the planet and finally settling in this ULF barrier around the equator. They are building this thing. And as some of you have heard me say on the net, Billy Hayes, the HAARP man, who was so valuable to me while I was writing the second book, because Billy was the tower erector on over 240 projects around the Earth of building these phased array antennas like HAARP. He worked on HAARP. He said that, this is all about, if he were to say what metaphor he would use for the ring around the equator, he would say it's like a CD. It's like a CD or a CD-ROM, if we still remember that term. And that is very interesting. Ever heard the term Akashic record? Yeah, I'm still thinking about this because there is interference being purposely put between us and our cosmos, between our planet and our cosmos. And surely this is one more part of it.
So what end?
I think it's the transhumanist end. I think it's the changing of our species, taking it out of the divine, if you will, for those who are atheists or agnostics or whatever, taking us away from the idea of the divine origin of the human being so as to move us toward the machined model of humanity under a whole new tendency of gods here on planet Earth. So everything that breaks down that assumption that we inherited from Europe, actually. I mean, I'm a dinosaur. I may look human to you, but I'm really a dinosaur because I was raised with a classical education in private schools and public schools. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, for all the bad things that we can say about Europe and about white privilege and all the rest of that stuff, the idea of the human being was ecce homo, would be the Latin, behold man. Now we'd say, oh, man, it's a gender thing. But at that time, the classical assumption was of the human being. And I just sucked it up. I think a lot of the human being because I think we're in an evolutionary process. Yeah, okay, so we're in first grade. That's about the best I can do for us at this point. I used to say kindergarten. We're a little bit further, but not much. And now we have accepted the shackles of psychopaths, dynastic bloodline psychopaths who believe they are to be as gods and we are to be as their slaves. And so anything that interrupts the assumption that there's anything of value in the human being has to be removed, has to be made fun of and sneered at. First thing, make sure that the race thing is really primary so that whites feel bad about being white and blacks feel good about being black. And why is that being done to us? You think it's just arising? It's not arising. It's being constructed so that we can be, when they come for us, and they will with the 5G, because it's going to happen through the environment. That's the thing I couldn't figure out. What are they going to get us all in the clinics and the hospitals? They're going to force us to be vaccinated? Well, they're going to do that, but no, they can do it remotely now with the electromagnetic environment and the weaponization of the entire environment. It will be done remotely. So now I look at my arsenal teeny-weeny electromagnetic spectrum, Schumann resonance, all life is one. But is there something that I have that makes them quake in their boots? Yes. It's called consciousness. It's called not letting that go, not at all. And keeping it strong and not doing the things that weaken it. If you're still watching television because you love the program, you'd better think about that. You'd better think about how you're spending your few years on the earth, because this is a long war. And it will go on when I'm ashes, and I'll be back. I've already decided. So I think
That's the title of your third book.
I'll be, wait, no, Arnold Schwarzenegger already took that line.
Not as a virus.
So that's why I've been showing you all these planetary rich images, is to get you into your planetary mind, and not in a new age way. Not in a peace and love and all is well, and I don't subscribe to that. I'm a warrior. I fight. And this is sort of our area here. And I wanted you to see how he said on there, the Air Force guy said, you know, the purpose of HAARP was always to control the ionosphere. And we have achieved that. So this will not stop. This is not a matter of petitioning or writing our congressman. They will not stop this space age. They will do what they see that they need to do for it. And meanwhile, the medical industry and Big Pharma will make money off of our illness.
Has Skynet gone global?
As what?
Has Skynet gone global? Like in,
Skynet, like in the movie?
in the Terminator, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And she'll be back.
I'll be back. And there's the magnetosphere with the Birkeland currents. Beautiful Birkeland currents flowing behind it. Notice, I don't think you can read what I wrote. Too bad. Okay, I'll tell you. So the magnetosphere, after CERN was in full operation a couple of years ago, completely flattened and then resurrected. So what does that say? Well, first of all, it says we'd better watch out for CERN, which of course I do. I turned to Anthony Patch. He's my go-to CERN man. But the second thing it says to me, anyway, is our magnetosphere flattened. What brought it back? Who are those allies? How did that happen? We are not alone, I say to myself again and again. I won't play this CERN one. It's so good, BP Earthwatch. I don't know if you subscribe to his channel, but he's excellent. How's my time doing? I'll just jabber on forever here. This is Bruce Cathy's harmonic mathematics computations to determine how our magnetic Earth really is, where the nodal points are, where the other points are, where the lines are, how it goes. He spent years on this. And you can go to that site, and even if you wanted to purchase the software, you can, though I don't know the fellow who inherited it all when Bruce Cathy died. And if you haven't read Bruce Cathy's books, you might want to. They're difficult. I had to read them 3 times to understand them, but I don't mind. Plasma tubes. This is looking up through a plasma tube. So when you see that on YouTube, you'll know that the sun is not dying. You're actually somehow able to look up one of those plasma tubes. And now let me show Sean's stuff. I need to do this before we break for Q&A. Sean Gautreaux, I tried to talk him into coming with me, or at least Skyping in. He refused. He's too poor. He lives in New Orleans, and he had some really good moneymaker thing going on through Mardi Gras. But he said I could use whatever I wanted, so I'm going to here. We'll just play this one. What is in those clouds? And now we're at the 7th operation, the detection and obscuration of exotic craft or technology.
Some of you will understand this. Some of you will not. Some of you have seen these things in the sky. Others have not. Some who see this presentation are way ahead of me. But the moral of the story is, you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. First, who am I? I am a book illustrator living in New Orleans, Louisiana. Since I was a teenager, one of my hobbies has been photography. I had said that my best capture ever was when I captured lightning hitting the World Trade Center in July of 2000. I could find very few similar photographs. In May of 2011, I revived my hobby in the form of video and trying to capture the almost daily lightning that accompanies afternoon storms that move through the area from the Gulf of Mexico. That worked great for a while until the storms strangely disappeared. No longer did the storms make their way this far north, so I could record them. One of the last good recordings I made of lightning that year was lightning that was forking horizontally in the sky against a double rainbow. At this point, I began studying radar. Not the radar from the nightly news, but radar directly from Uncle Sam. Instead of the storms moving in, they unexpectedly halted miles away and evaporated. I began recording this anomaly in video while confirming it on radar. Moreover, the local radar showed some very uncharacteristic patterns. I am not a meteorologist, but I know local weather patterns and patterns that should not be showing up on radar. The radial burst patterns that emanated from the same spots and impacted the storm fronts became obvious. Other patterns began to occur. It seemed like dense areas of sky material would pop out of the sky, or maybe even the ground, and would affect the storm's intensity, sometimes in a calming manner, and sometimes in a way that would increase the intensity. Also, thin waves of material or energy began to show itself, moving perpendicularly and also affecting the storms. Have you ever wondered why your radar actually looks like this on a clear day? In June, I used a long-range DSLR to record still shots at a distance of cloud patterns that were not natural. Triangle clouds, square clouds, clouds shaped like submarines, and certain animals began appearing. The spine cloud, the Christmas tree cloud, the crawfish cloud, and the dolphin cloud were some of the names that I used to identify these atypical but recurring types. Patterns and repetition gave it away. While searching for another angle on these phenomena, I was able to download satellite images of the area to look for clues. The thermal images were most interesting. It did not take long before I spotted patterns that should not be there. Cold, black triangles, abnormal cloud patterns, water surface reflections of clouds that did not appear above them in the photo, angular clouds, angular shadows, retouched photos, objects above the water that could not be explained, bluish-green vapors coming from the surface-based spots. Vortexes is the term I first used for the wind currents that ripped apart our storms. I also applied it to the larger constant wind currents that seem to surround the area on a daily basis.
So you can see that on your own on the web. And I highly recommend it because observation is exceptional in Sean. He's extraordinarily observational, which is a rare thing these days. Things are moving so fast, we're just sort of barely all keeping up. But he's very committed to observing. I won't play the other one, but I highly recommend you check out his series. It used to be What is in Our Skies? He has since changed it to Who is in Our Skies? On the web, you can just go to What is in Our Skies, Sean Gautreaux. And he's taking a break now, but he's got a lot of work up that you can profit from. Okay, this is us. This is the world we really live in. If we could see that we are all just waves. We're hardly particles even. We're just waves. And we're surrounded by more waves, and we're being interpenetrated by more waves. And I put this in. I'm going to show you something now that is pretty astonishing. I don't know what to do with it, but I've had it for a few years. And I'm reminding you of what Hermes Trismegistus said maybe 2,000 years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, I don't know. As above, so below. This, of course, is the mantra of the global elites. It has great significance to them. You can see the illustration on there of the two-headed being standing upon the head of the dragon. The dragon being the dragon lines, being the electromagnetism of the earth. To be able to control it is to control everything. So now we can see this. I don't know. I don't think you'll be able to hear the sound, but you'll be able to see.
He's found one other one I can see there. It actually looks more brown. That's one I'll analyze on zoom shots as being a object that's behind a brown area, and it's similar to the first object. Or no, this is the first object again. He's actually zoomed in on, and it's just rotating it, and he's just been able to use his feet as a leverage and his two arms, same as a human would do, and he now will soon pull that fiber into that skin tunnel. There's the other one there in that opening there. So I've actually zoomed in on that one, and he'll try to focus again on the object now, bringing the fiber, the Morgellons fiber, into the. There's one other object as well, which I'll zoom in on. So he's still struggling now on the.
Okay, that's enough. You get the point, right? It's extraordinary. Like I said, I don't see a CGI here. I don't. They morph. Okay, so now we can have questions or.
Okay. Lights up then.